Well, let's start with the good news. The
Hmm.
United States is the world's largest energy and agricultural producer and the world's largest energy and agricultural exporter. That's a good start. Also, our baby boomers did something that no one else's did, and they had kids. So say what you will about the millennials, they're here, and that provides the United States with ballast in its consumption and its production now, and will provide ballast with its advanced production, its tech system, and its capital generation in 10 years. That's great. I mean, you can't screw that up. We'll try, but I don't think we're going to make it.
Hmm.
The biggest challenge the United States is going to have for the next 5 years is rebuilding that industrial plant, hopefully before the Chinese system completely implodes. I doubt we're going to make it. So we're going to have a simultaneous shock from product shortages. At the same time, we're trying to build that dirty word inventory to insulate us. At the same time, we're trying to build out everything about our manufacturing system. This is going to generate what will probably be the most inflationary period, at least since World War II. And it will last for at least 5 years. Now, while we could theoretically screw this up, this is probably also going to be the fastest growth that America has experienced since before the Civil War, because we're looking at just a massive expenditure to build out that asset class that's necessary for us to have the things that we want and need. We're doing this with the baby boomers retiring. We're doing this with Gen Z, the young kids coming in, and boomers were the largest generation we've ever had. Gen Z is our smallest one ever. So we already have a shortage of 400,000 workers a year in a time that we need to double the industrial plant. This is going to be rough. But on the backside of this, we'll have a more stable supply chain system that is largely within North America and is subject to North America things. That's not going to trigger a global trend. That's going to remove the United States from really caring at all about how foreign supply chains work.
Hmm.
And that's going to leave us to other countries to either pick up the pieces or shrivel. Overall, I think you're on
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
We're going to have shortages in a number of products because of what the Russians are, well, because the Russian stuff is being removed from the system.
Right.
Former Soviet commodities being dumped on the global market since 1992 are one of the two biggest reasons why inflation has been so low for the
Exactly.
last 30 years. And
Yeah.
that's completely going away. So the oil situation is obviously huge. Natural gas for the Europeans and for fertilizer markets is huge. Fertilizer markets in general is a nightmare. We're losing 70% of the world's neon. That means we get to decide later this year what doesn't get a semiconductor because we can't make as many.
Exactly.
Uh, on the gasoline question specifically, however, the US president has the authority from the 2015 budget bill to summarily bar oil exports. So,
Mm.
what's going on with our oil markets right now is we export several million barrels a day of high quality shale crude that's light and
Yes.
sweet and broadly easy to refine. And we import a similar amount of heavy sludge, primarily from Canada, but not exclusively, that we only the United States has the refineries that are sophisticated enough to turn into high end product. And then we export some of that product as well. If Biden were to reinstitute the oil ban, all the shale crude would be locked up in the United States. You'd have catastrophic energy prices globally, but you'd have rock bottom energy prices within the United States.
Right.
And we would have to go through a blitz of refining capacity expansion because while Biden can bar exports of crude, he can't bar exports of any other energy product, including gasoline and diesel.
Hmm.
So I can see an environment where the refiners bitch and moan and scream for a couple of years until they've built out like 4 or 5 million barrels a day of new capacity. And then all of a sudden they're like the fattest cats in the land because they have imported crude, they have local crude, they have different blends that can turn into different products. And every single one of them is exportable to an energy market globally that is sky high. That is how you make $1 billion these years. We have every
Hmm.
refinery by definition has a lot of standoff space because when you work with petrochemicals, you don't want to be
Right.
close to a housing unit.
Right.
So we have seen, especially in Texas, significant build outs, and I can see new fractionating and distillation units being built at every single facility that can tap the shale market. That is largely Texas.
Yeah.
And let me add something to your investment target, a fertilizer plant.
Yeah.
Let's start with cell phones. The two ecosystems for cell phones are either Korea-based or China-based with, Korea-based with Android, China-based with
Hmm.
Apple. Apple has put 90% of its sourcing in the PRC. And every time that something has happened that has made them, maybe think twice about that, they've decided to double down. So they are
Yeah.
the most exposed company in the world to the China collapse. So if you don't get the next iPhone, you're probably not going to have an iPhone for several years.
Wow.
Korea is a little bit better, but they have a system that is sourced throughout the East Asian Rim. They are also China dependent, not to the same degree. But Korea is one of those fast aging countries, arguably one of the top three fastest aging in the world. It's unclear how long they can maintain that system without the Americans helping. And it's not clear that the Americans want to. Steel's an issue. The Russians are the world's largest exporter of pig iron. Now, Russia plus Ukraine are the largest. Some countries, like I should say most countries, your Indias, your Chinas, your Frances, your Germanys, they do all of it in their own country. So they import the iron ore, they turn it into an intermediate product in a blast furnace, then they finally refine it into more advanced products. It's all there. They see it as a national security issue. The United States is the world's best steel recycler. So almost 99% of the steel that we use goes through a second, third, fourth, fifth, and 17th use. But whenever we need something to be pretty, like cladding on an appliance or roof work or anything you see on the outside of a building, anything that's visible, you need virgin steel for that generally. And so we don't smelt iron ore
Hmm.
hardly at all. We buy pig iron off the international market and then use it to make the pretty stuff. 2/3 of our supply comes from Russia and Ukraine. So that's one where the rest of the world is, I don't want to say okay, but they can deal, whereas we're probably going to have a problem. We're going to have some ugly buildings. And there's no way around that until you build a new steel facility, which we haven't done in quite some time. There's an argument that a lot of this is coming back. It will. But again, you don't build that industrial plant overnight. The one I'm most concerned about is fertilizer. Belarus plus Ukraine plus Russia is 40% of global phosphate. It takes 10 years to bring a phosphate mine online. The natural gas prices in Europe have gotten so high, they're not even making nitrogen fertilizer. We're expanding that here, but that takes 3 years. And then phosphate, we used to get the bulk of internationally traded phosphate from the Chinese, but the Chinese are having food security issues, and so they've banned all export. So we're looking at a breakdown in the supply system for all three fertilizers at the same time, and we should not expect it to get better in the next 2 years. So we're already seeing in more advanced countries a degree of crop switching, less corn, less soy, more hay, for crops that are less fertilizer intensive. And in poorer countries, whether it's South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, we're seeing countries just not use much fertilizer.
Hmm.
Now, we don't know how bad this is going to be until we get some harvest forecasts. We'll probably get that around September. But we're looking at the worst global harvest year in years. And that is going to generate the start of a multi-year famine. There is no way to avoid it at this point. The war could end tomorrow, and it's
Yeah.
already too late for this season. Our political system is in one of its periods of generational reset when the factions move around, and every party for most of their duration has like one faction who's kind of first among equals, if you will. In the Republican Party, that was the business community for a long time, but Trump ejected the business community from the Republican coalition. So we're not having that kind of coherent discussion of economic matters that we normally would expect to see within the Republican coalition. The business community might come back. They might switch to the Democrats. They might become swing voters. Don't know. We're not to the point where we can have that discussion
Hmm.
nationally and coherently yet. Uh, Luckily, there are a lot of new technologies in manufacturing that support a supply chain system that is much closer to the consumer, sometimes even co-located. So when you take things like the ultra cheap stuff coming out of the shale fields that can be used to make more value-added products like plastics, that's a completely domestic supply chain. You marry that to something like, say, 3D printing, and anyone who has a warehouse can now also be a manufacturing center. So it's not so much that you have an Amazon distribution center close by and get products the next day. It's that you have someone's, like Amazon's, distribution and manufacturing center nearby, and your product is made and delivered to you the next day.
Hmm.
That is going to be the norm for probably about a third of consumer goods. And then the more advanced stuff like your washing machines and your cars We already have a lot of that here, and the Mexicans are proving remarkably creative at moving up the value added scale very quickly. I'd say in terms of total labor productivity, the Mexicans have now passed the Canadians.
Wow.
There are plenty of pinch points. There's no way we adapt to this quickly, but we were seeing the fastest industrialization process in the American history in the last year of the Obama administration.